We would like to welcome you to Rock the Lyceum. For those of you joining us for the first time, the Rock the Lyceum series is hosted by NCCU's Office of Student Engagement and Leadership, along with the Lyceum Committee. The series brings in several of the nation's top entrepreneurs and thought leaders to engage students in relevant topics in education, entertainment, politics, and social justice. I would like to begin by introducing myself and then have my fellow co host introduce herself, after which she will introduce our speaker for the evening. I am Jasmine Abney, a junior political science major from Charlotte, North Carolina. I serve alongside my co host for the evening, Anaya Hairston, as co chairs of the Political Action and Civic Engagement of Student Government Association.
Thank you, Jasmine. Good evening, everyone. Again, my name is Anaya Hairston, and I am also a junior political science student from Madison, North Carolina, and I serve alongside Jasmine Abney. So tonight I have the honor of serving as one of your co-hosts for this evening's Rock the Lyceum, featuring our very own Eagle State Representative, Zack Hawkins. So just to share a bit about who we are blessed to have with us this evening, in November of 2018, Hawkins became the youngest person to be elected to represent the city of Durham in the North Carolina House District 31. Then in November of 2020, he was reelected for a second term. He has more than 10 years of experience in higher education, nonprofit, and political fundraising, as well as special events and alumni relations. And on top of that, he has 18 plus years of direct community and political engagement. Currently, Mr. Hawkins serves as the Chief Development Officer of the Division of Student Affairs at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Let's all give a virtual hand clap for Mr. Zack Hawkins.
Hey, thank you for having me. This is great. Great to be with both of you.
Yes, thank you. So with that being said, we're happy to have you here, and we'll just go ahead and jump right in.
Okay, sounds good. I'm glad to be here. Really appreciate student affairs and you two for hosting. You both are politically engaged in your own right, and audiences and opportunities like this are just incredibly important. Part of my story is I am from an incredibly small town in North Carolina called Chocowinity, North Carolina. It had less than 800 people, one stoplight, and I think we had a little bit of a chief, like officer or whatever, like police, a small police department. But it was one of those places that taught you a lot about life. And I had a grandmother who was involved incredibly in her community, and so she sort of drove me to be involved in student government and working across boundaries, most of which were racial at that time, and then just had an incredible sort of support system that led me to go when I went to Elizabeth City State to serve in student government. And in 2000, I got bit by the bug, and it was the Bush v. Gore years. And I led the voter education project. And the North Carolina Democratic Party was reaching out to HBCUs, and they tapped me and said, "Hey, we'd love for you to do this." And sometimes you think you're just going to do something for a season, and it ended up being this just amazing, amazing time. So I'm from there. Of course, I then became an Eagle in 2001, and I think from there it was an opportunity of a lifetime, because you're moving from where I was coming in Eastern North Carolina to Durham, and where Black people and and institutions, you had all these things that showed us in charge and showed us making a difference in the world. And I got here, and then I had a young son at the time who had his arm broken in daycare, funny enough. And I said I was in graduate school, and North Carolina Central had set me up to be involved and to get degrees and go off and get a PhD. But when that happened, I wanted to get involved. The reason that I wanted to is because I felt helpless and hopeless. And there were so many people that I realized along the way that felt that exact same way. They lived in a state of helplessness, where they could not connect to the resources and nobody was there to be a voice. And so through that process, working and being involved in the Democratic Party and working for Congressman David Price, I had a chance to start to move up the ranks and learn more and more. And then later I decided to become a public school teacher. And because of those two instances, I realized that the best place to be was in office, because at the end of the day, you had to be in the place where the action was taking place to be a voice for all those people that I met along the way. I have students that I still keep in contact. I have people that I met when I first got to North Carolina Central, who have played a critical role in all this. And so I'm just, again, glad to be here. But I think this is an important conversation. That's a little bit about me and sort of how I got here.
All right, thank you so much for that. And we'll move right further along into the presentation and kind of going through that.
Sure. Let's see if I can navigate here. I don't know if I can. All right, let's see if it'll share. All right, let me know if you can see this. Okay. Well, good. Well, I appreciate again this opportunity, because the backdrop of why you're having this is to talk about how government can work for you, right? And at the end of the day, I think what's important is people, as I explained in my own personal story, the reason I got re-involved is because I had a issue, a tragedy, something that I couldn't solve, and so it sprung me into action. And so whatever the issue is, people sort of have to know the way that government is impacting their everyday life, or they have to be able to look and see how inaction or government action is hurting someone. And so I think that the issues at the end of the day are really, for me, what really drive my involvement. And so some of the pieces that you also have to understand from my perspective about the way that government engages people's lives and the way that people can make it work for them is knowing who can help them, right? So if you don't know who can help you, who can get it for you, who can give whatever you're looking for, if you don't know who that is and know what those levers are, then you're going to be lost. And so some of those things that I'm sort of working on and sort of thinking about and have come especially for Black folks in general is things from health disparities to if you're a college student and watching this, your parents may or may not like how much you pay for tuition, right? They may not like how much you pay for books. They may some families are not making $15 an hour. Whatever the case is, those kinds of things are the issues that I think about all the time, and that's why I think that it's just again so important to sort of to ensure that people start with the basics of what you care about and how government impacts you, because that alone will take you to the next level and will help you start the process of navigating politics.
Okay, so you kind of flown past some things, and you told us a little bit, but can you take a step back and really tell us a little bit more about your story? I know you talked about Bush v. Gore, and you talked about daycare. Hey, what else? What else? And
I tried to speed through that. I did. I apologize. I think the biggest thing, is that, when you start to think about when I talked about Bush v. Gore, it was a time, I mean, the country was pretty divided at that point. Because we saw what happened, in the election, but the lead up to that, we had come off of 8 years of President Clinton, And it was a really good time for people to get involved and engaged. And so, by, having the opportunity to play a role where I was having the opportunity to talk to my, friends and neighbors and get a chance to know people in the community. People were coming on campus who were, elected officials trying to rally and, get the vote. It started to play into some of my natural strengths. And what they were talking about, what I learned really early is that they were trying to tailor their message so that they could get our vote. Does that make sense? And so if they were on a Black college campus, they were talking about things that they thought would appeal to us. And so that those kinds of small wheels started to turn. So when my own sort of issue happened in 2001, I sort of thought about that same thing. That means somebody somewhere has to care about this, and I need to go find out who those people are. And so my son, who is now he's as I say, a strappingly handsome 19-year-old who's looking for a girlfriend. He's fine now, but then he was a 7-month-old kid. And as a dad who had just moved to Durham, again, I felt pretty helpless and hopeless because I didn't know where to turn. I'd just gotten here. No, this is a corporation. I think it was a child care network or something like that. They had a team of lawyers who could cover their butts, and they would they sort of did that. They covered themselves, and no one would take the case. And so I didn't know what to do other than get involved and try and meet as many people as possible. Because what I realized about this situation is that, again, while I felt this sense of helplessness and hopelessness, I had to, because I had to move forward and find a way to protect my family. Does that make sense? I had to find a way to make this right, because I said, well, this is never going to happen to me again, ever. And that's when I literally showed up on the doorsteps of David Price's congressional office. And I just kept showing up until somebody gave me something to do, until I had the opportunity to get a chance to meet the officials and the people that were around them, and to learn a little bit more about how the process worked. Because again, I gotten a little taste, about a year or so before that, but this seemed like a really good opportunity to get to know the community around me. And I can't tell you how much I was shaped by, I had eventually had the opportunity to start to drive the congressman around and, start to go to events with him and, come into North Carolina Central. When you get a chance to do that, you start to hear people's stories. You start to understand, what's really happening. And so I got a crash course in meeting people who were just like me, who, again, they felt helpless and hopeless. They didn't know where to turn. So they were turning to him or turning to someone who knew him to try and solve their problem. And so some of those things, for me were just incredible as a learning experience. And then, after I started getting involved, it became, I learned about the rest of the structures that were in place. Not only was, okay, this community and the candidate, now you have this whole party system that controls who is involved, engaged, what they talk about. You learn about party platform. Does that make sense? And so it just, as I kept showing up, it really started to unravel, the whole piece. And then of course, if you're in Durham, Durham is like, you get a PhD. That's what I say. When I got to Durham, I got a PhD in politics, because you have the Mickey Mashaws of the world, who's a great Double Eagle alum, Jeannie Lucas, and a host of others who have come through here. And I remember being this 23, 24-year-old kid, in their presence. and starting to learn that not only did you have the the issue of candidates and getting stuff done, but then you had issues that were just related to us as Black people that they would need to focus on in the way that they needed to do their work. And so I stayed with it, obviously, right? and and I think all the better for it, because a lot of the things that I've learned have transformed me now. I have two more little boys. They have autism, and so the ability for me to use those same skills to fight and advocate for them are the ones that I learned all those years ago. And so my wife and I are well versed now in how to make sure that we not only are advocating for ourselves, but we're bringing as many people along with us as we can. So that's a little bit more. I apologize for going over, for skimming over that.
I definitely appreciate the detail. That really makes a lot of sense as to how you are, where you are, and being so impactful. So we appreciate that.
Mhm. And if you don't mind, I do have another question. So, you have an extensive background in politics, and not only that, but you are an Eagle yourself. So, I would really say, can you go into more detail about your years at NCCU and how that prepared you to serve, and then why is it important to you to serve your community?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, as I was mentioning before, when you're here on campus, you realize that North Carolina Central is the epicenter for Black political engagement in the city. I mean, again, once you start realizing, who the founder of North Carolina Central was and what he did in the community and what it meant to have a place where people could come together and teach students, how to engage. If you came to Durham, if you were any civil rights or candidate, you had to come through North Carolina Central. Being the first public HBCU in the country, and again having the type of alumni base that it had, it just blows you away very, very early, because people respect what happens at North Carolina Central. They respect the alums that come out of North Carolina Central, and you get a taste of that while you're there. Now, when I was here, 2001 to 2004, the climate was, a little bit different, right? I think we were in 9/11. I'll never forget it. I was walking into the biology building, and in 9/11, the Twin Towers were starting to come down, and which is like years away from where we are now, but that's what was happening here. And the things and the people that I got a chance to meet are really honestly what connected me to Durham. I was talking about, mentioning to Anaya about, Tulsa. The friends that I made in those spaces have grown with me, from their my undergraduate and graduate years, to being a part of a community that, again, has shaped who I am later on because of the work of the committee that you all are co-chairing. John White, I think, was chair of that committee all these years ago with Jarvis. And we helped to lead the NCCU students down to Hillside. About 800 students marched from North Carolina Central to Hillside, because the thing that we realized was that they had taken the voting precinct off of our campus, and we were going to show them that we meant business and that there was going to be no obstacle in our way. And that was in 2004. That's why, again, while I was there. And so North Carolina Central, and again, I want to make sure that I would not personally be here without North Carolina Central. The lessons that I learned, the people that I met, the experiences and the things that I can call back to, have shaped me in ways that I'm still working to unravel. And the reason that I serve and why it's important to serve, I think at the end of the day, it's the rent that we pay. If you have the rent we pay for living on this earth, it is one of those things that you don't all have to be politicians or presidents of the United States. But I do believe with MLK, it says that everybody can be great because everybody can serve in some way. You can help someone walk across the street safely, and you've done something to help humanity. And if you're able-bodied, if you're um, someone who can think for themselves and and has your faculties, you really need to find any privilege that you have, you should use to help someone else. And by doing that, what you do in my mind is, if you want your kids to go to safer schools, guess what you need to do? You need to help those who are potentially in crime ridden areas who are underserved have better resources. Does that make sense? And if you want, to have those same schools have, better resources, you need to go down and talk to your county commission about ways that they can better fund the schools. And so I just think that it's an opportunity of a lifetime to be able to have the trust of people to think that you are worthy to serve them and represent them. You are literally the person, and for us, we serve about 80,000 people in our districts. But in Durham, you serve all of Durham and all of its entities. But to think that the people of Durham find me worthy enough to press a button and to use my voice on their behalf is just beyond humbling. And I think that it's just the honor of service is something that people need to attach themselves to, but the basics of service and being able to improve someone else's life is really what, for me, is the essence of it.
The honor of service. That's powerful. And that is so much of what we do here at NCCU. Just to speak to that moment that you talked about, that march to Hillside in 2004, that has been a driving force of the work of myself and so many other students who are currently at NCCU, because Dr. Jarvis Hall has pictures of that in the political science department. He has pictures of that in his office. So if you've ever been to his little corner office and office hours, you've seen it, and you've seen the power, and we've seen the faces in the moment. And so everything that we do in keeping our precinct at Turner Law on our campus is driven by moments. We saw so many students voting. That's always the goal. And of course, the pandemic made it a little different.
That's right. I'm telling you, it's nothing short of amazing. It really was. I think I still have, we even had the Eagle mascot down there, taking pictures with Dr. Ammons, who was the chancellor a few years ago, and Jeannie Lucas when she was still alive. And so it was really a flex that made statewide and national news. So like you said, it was a pretty impressive moment. And it all came again from this group and SGA, and a whole lot of others saying, you know what, we are not going to let them get in our way. We're going to show them that North Carolina, because the deal was, they said that North Carolina students didn't care. North Carolina Central students didn't care. So I guess they realize we do now, right?
Thank you for helping us prove them wrong and helping us build an awesome legacy at NCCU. So to keep it moving, to bring us up to present day, right? Sure. What are you working on in the NC House of Representatives, and how are those issues important to making government really, really work for us as the people?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. So I'll loop through this to this slide, if that's okay. And that sort of goes to, I think some of the pieces that I want people to see is, we're working on some of the basics. Some of that is voting rights, right? And some of that is voting rights because every time there seems to be a step forward with participation of folks of color, there seems to be a backlash. And a little bit of history is that we, after 2004, of course, we saw the move towards, Obama and Hillary in 2008 and Obama winning in '08. And then what happened very, very quickly in 2010 is that the opposing party won, and in 2011, they put in the most restrictive legislation for voting and redistricting and gerrymandering in the country. And that's stuff that we're still working through. And so that's why voting rights is on the list, because, again, people like Mickey Mishaw, who's my predecessor, worked so hard to make sure that we even had access to the ballot and to make sure that the franchise was expanded to now making sure that we can open it up even more. Because at the end of the day, if you restrict people like us coming to the polls, there are certain people who know that they can't win. And I think that at the end of the day is what people realize, and that's why we have to stay vigilant. A couple other things I want to make sure I show this is that things that are particularly focused on the workings of people of color, because you have to. One thing I've learned about being in the General Assembly is if you don't speak up and say anything about it, it will fly under the radar and you will be forgotten. And so, things like health disparities and Black maternal health, making sure, because at the end of the day, we're seeing not only a healthcare crisis with COVID, but literally the healthcare system is killing Black women. Full stop. And we have to do something about it. Same thing with education, right? Making sure that we're stopping the school to prison pipeline by making sure that we have well-funded schools, nurses. There are lots of Black businesses who do not have access to the same capital that their white counterparts do. And we have to make sure that we're talking about that kind of stuff.
I mean, awesome points. And I think you're really tapped in to this community and what we think about and how we're feeling. It's not every day that we hear our representatives talking about Black maternal health, especially. And so that was real deep for me personally, just to hear that.
Yeah. No, I think it's important. I watched my wife and my sisters go through challenges with maternal health. We all know the Serena Williams story. She told her doctors something's wrong, but there's a history of them not listening to Black women. And so Senator Natalie Murdoch, who is my counterpart in the Senate who represents Durham, are working on those bills.
Absolutely awesome. And so to continue talking about Black women, and not to move you forward too quickly.
No, you're good. You're good.
But this has been a big. People talk about 2020, and I'm not really a big fan of this moniker, but of being kind of the year of the Black woman, especially in politics. And one of the most kind of prominent figures that we saw in 2020 was, of course, Miss Stacey Abrams. And her work with her own organization and just all that she's done over the last few years. Why did she really focus on voter registration? That's something that you've talked about a few times, but you can kind of delve into.
Yeah, I think, she's brilliant. She's an HBCU grad and she's brilliant. I had the opportunity to meet her and when she came to Durham and introduce her, and the work that she has dedicated herself to, I didn't realize she had been doing since she was 18 years old, first off. So she understood the process. She got started a little young and worked her way up. But the reason that she started to really focus in on some of that is, in my mind, she understood a couple of things, right? She understood first that in order to win, we have to make sure that as many people are involved in the process as possible, right? First, it was just a numbers game, a pure numbers game of understanding that, especially in her state, but that if you peel it back, is replicated in other states, that there are certain people who, because of minuscule laws, will take people off the rolls without them knowing about it, right? or outright strip, take them off the roll, but sometimes just so um, under the radar that someone will, it's enough of a slight for someone to say, oh, well, I'm not registered to vote. Oh, well, I'm not worried about it anyway. Does that make sense? It's enough of an obstacle that someone who's working hard every day and not wanting to be too involved will just pass it by. And little by little, it starts to erode the process. And so what she did, and what a lot of people, especially, folks here in North Carolina are doing as well, is thinking about ways that we can, not only register them to vote so that they have the access, but then also educate them, right? Because when you talk to someone and say, can you register to vote? What's the first thing they're going to say? Is why? Why do I need to do this? And that gives you an open invitation to talk about all the things you care about and all the reasons that they need to get involved. And so I think that it's a beautiful thing because it's, as I talked about before, it's just one of the easiest opportunities to serve, right? To get you to dip your feet into the tunnel. But you can go through a summer and register 1,000 voters, which means it's 1,000 people that you've talked to, touched, engaged, and now 1,000 people who will get a piece of mail, right? 1,000 people who will get emails about political stuff, and their consciousness honestly has been woken because, oh, okay, I need to start paying attention because I'm a registered voter. It's almost like a badge of honor. And so by the simple things that she did, by pushing that, she understood all those layers as a part of the process.
Thank you so much for that. Really, I think some of what voter registration is, I think a lot of times people just think that it's just one part in itself, like, oh, I registered to vote and I did my part and, I voted. But I think it's important to also recognize, the role that it plays in the government. So would you mind explaining the role that voter registration plays in government?
Yeah. I'm gonna stop this share if that's okay with you. Hold on one second. If it will stop. But one of the things that as you talked about the reason what it plays into is because one of the things that political campaigns and folks who are paying attention and politicians who are in vote in office is I once a quarter I send a new voter letter to everyone in my district that's just moved in, etc. And guess the thing that I pay attention to is, gosh, it was only 300 in March, and now in June is 700 or 800. What does that tell me? That tells me that there are a lot of new people that I have to get to know, and that people somewhere in my district, somebody's putting in the work to get people, have people part of the process. And right now, I don't know who those people are who are engaging them, nor do I know who those voters are. And so I need to get my butt out of Raleigh, come back to Durham, and go find those people. Does that make sense? And so by doing that, and I don't care what level of government, people pay attention to those kinds of numbers. And so by simply registering to vote and taking your part to get a clipboard and get others to do it, you put them on notice, so to speak. You start to get their attention by being a part of the process. I think the other thing, again, as I was mentioning, before, is when you do that, your consciousness wakes up in ways that you don't even understand. And I think that that's really an important part of being a registered voter, because guess what? Now people are going to call you on the phone and say, hey, do you, because before you're registered to vote, you don't get those polling calls. You don't get those, will you come to my event, or will you, how do you start? You get polling calls and say, well, how do you feel about this candidate? And as aggravating as they may be, all those things, especially when you start to get into certain seasons, really care. And so I think that first off, it really puts the people who are in power on notice that there are new people and they have to get out and engage them. There's not a politician alive that does not want to make themselves known in their districts. If they feel that they're in a place where they are out of the know, then they want to get in the know as soon as possible. And again, what that does is that means that, for someone like me, when I go walk the street, I'm going to find those people and I have to stay on top of the issues, right? Because they may not care about some of the same things I'm talking about. They may want to, learn who I am and what I care about. And so I may need to start adding their legislative issues to my agenda, right? And what I'm doing in Raleigh. And so I really think that, again, just it's a simple thing, but it's really one of the most incredible things. And then I think one of the important pieces that has been brought out by the pandemic is when new people start to get involved and they see old systems, they start to say, well, this is dumb that I have to fill out a piece of paper. Does that make sense? I should be able to do it online. And so they start to say, well, why can't we, just automatically register to vote, right? Why can't I do it when I'm 16? Why can't I just go to the DMV? And so a lot of the changes that we've seen in voter registration laws have not only come from advocacy communities like Democracy NC and the Common Cause and those groups, but they have come from everyday people realizing that the system is not what it needs to be and it needs to be updated.
Absolutely. I think you talked a moment about those canvassing calls that we get once we register. But can we shift and talk about the people who are making those canvassing calls, whether they're for nonpartisans or they are working on a campaign? I know I've made a few hundred of those calls myself, and we've even moved to text in 2020. So can you give us a couple of reasons as to why campaigns are really worth getting involved in and serving on or serving for?
Yeah, I think, and that's how as I shared, that's how I, cut my teeth. And I flat out, I will hire people who've been teachers and have worked on campaigns. And the reason that it's so important to work on a campaign is that if you care about an issue, like when I got involved, I cared about getting to know my community and figuring out somebody who could connect me to stick it to this childcare facility that hurt my kid, right? That was my mission in the very beginning. But if you start the process of caring about an issue, then the natural next step is to put yourself in the space where the decision maker or a decision maker or decision makers are, right? It's just logic. And the thing that I found out through the process is that you learn two things by being involved in campaigns, or three. You get a chance to learn the community and how politics works, and the process of how do you message to people, right? How do you say what you think they want or need to hear, and you learn how to get their feedback appropriately to get the answer that you need. You get a chance to organize people and to around a common cause. But most importantly, when you start to meet the politician, you also get a chance to see and figure out who has their ear, who makes them move, who will they pick up the phone for. Does that make sense? What organizations are they listening to more so than others? Because and then if you fast forward it, at the end of the day, what you find is that the people that they're listening to, get money from, and all those things generally translates into the same people who they're doing their bidding for and supporting when they're in office. Does that make sense? And that's not necessarily always a bad thing. It's not, but it's really good for people to understand that that's a part of where campaigns are and where you can, and why it's important to get involved, because you learn so many skill sets, but you also learn, again, how people are influenced and how politics starts to be influenced.
Okay. So I know you just mentioned talking about like political campaigns. Um, and kind of what those are. But can you just talk a little bit about how some campaigns aren't necessarily political, and then do you have to work for a political candidate when you're doing that campaigning?
Yeah. Second answer is no. I think that now what I will say about campaigns is that all of them have a political end, right? Um, and what I mean by that is I don't care if you get tired of cars speeding by your house, you get ticked off about that. And you're like, well, who can fix this problem? What you're going to do is you're going to go talk to your next door neighbor, right? You guys going to think about that problem is and how it can hurt kids, and then that's going to spread to the neighborhood association. And all in all, what becomes of that is a multi-family and insert association campaign to get that done, right? Because you get a chance to figure out what that is. And so that's a base level understanding of what a campaign can be. But also, as I started, you can do issue-based campaigns, right? If you only care about the environment, if you only care about the minimum wage, if you only care about voting rights, you don't have to work for a candidate to do that. And now again, it has a political end because the organizing that you will do, things like fair housing. Fair housing, is a issue-based piece on its own where people, connect with residents to hear what they want. They then, figure out a plan of action to get those things done, and eventually it makes it to places like housing authorities, which then generally have to go up to city councils. Does that make sense? And so you don't have to be a part of it, but the thing that I always say is that if you're, I heard a long time ago, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu, right? And so the campaign is a apparatus. Whatever campaign you become a part of, is part of that apparatus to put you at the table, so that people can listen to your voice, hear your voice, and that of your community. But I always say that when people talk about campaigns, they generally think again presidentials and all that. Squash that. It doesn't matter what campaign you become a part of. It teaches you it's the exact same mechanics. It's the exact same skill sets that you're going to need. And it has the basic tenets of hearing issues, organizing people, coming up with solutions, solving those problems.
I think you made that super digestible. And I really appreciate that because it's not often that we hear campaigns being broken down like that and just made so everyday, so commonplace.
Oh yeah.
It's normally just that thing we see on the news or that thing that's calling our phone or ringing our doorbell.
That's right.
Once a year or once every couple of years.
That's right.
But I think this is a place where a lot of people are in right now. Campaign season is over, right? We know that there are issue-based campaigns around us, but nobody's calling us and bugging us in the streets and on the news and on the radio, asking us for our help and our opinions and our votes or our money. So now what do we do? Like, what are our next steps as voters? Because we know there's different levels of political participation, but how do we tap into that?
That's I'm so glad that you asked that question, because at the end of the day, advocacy should be 365, 24/7, 365. It's an ongoing effort, because if for those who are following this conversation, I started with the issue, right? I started with the issue that you care about. It's maternal health, it's affordable housing, it's voting rights, you name it. It's the cars on the street and smog in the air, whatever it is. You then say, you know what, I'm going to make sure that enough people can engage in the process through voter registration or voter education. Then we're going to run some campaign to get those people involved, to vote for a candidate or vote against a candidate, to share your issues and views so you can shape that legislative agenda. But one of the, and I'm dating myself here, but there's this tale of Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, right? He's a good guy who just wants to do the right thing, and goes to DC but the people don't come with him. And what advocacy is two things. It's making sure that not only do you hold accountable the elected official that you have elected to do what he said he or she will do, but you also make sure that your issue stays relevant on their minds. And the reason that that's important is I can tell you, just as a state legislator, there are so many things that you get hit with when you serve on city, county, state, congressional, or United States Senate. There are so many things that you get hit with from so many different angles because everybody wants you to vote for their particular deal. And so advocacy, if you have had the opportunity to spend time with an organization or a candidate, then it's only fair that now that that person is in office, or those set of people are in office, that you go back to them and remind them, hey, we're still here. We care about this, and this is exactly what you said you were going to do. And guess what, politician? We're going to stay with you throughout that process. And I think that is just I think at the end of the day, the best way for people to think about it, because if your political figure or the apparatus that's calling you, if they haven't been calling you, then it's your job to keep that party going. Because if you want politicians to not come around just in the 3 months before an election, you're going to have to do the work of 365 advocacy so that they always see you as people they have to check in with. If you realize that members of Congress or members of an assembly always go to certain organizations. You have the Durham Committee, you have the Durham People's Alliance, you have all these organizations that people make sure that they do, is because they're always around and always talking about the issues. And so if you or the organization that you're part of, or you yourself as a voter, want to be treated the same way, that means you have to consistently be emailing and calling and doing those things. Because again, if not, it's going to be a problem. I would say the other piece that is important is knowing the process. Know the process. Who remembers, what is it? I'm just a bill sitting on Capitol Hill. Like, overly, elementary, but it taught so many people the process. And the one thing that you have to know is the rules. You have to know the rules of the game. You have to know the rules in the process so that you can find how to keep that moving, if that makes sense. So that's what I would say is just, I think, so important about, ongoing advocacy, because the other part of that too is that, you engaged all these people because you cared about something. You found out they cared about it too. Y'all got into a campaign together. Now, if you want to keep the band together, you have to keep advocating. Does that make sense? Until you actually get the prize. And a lot of times what I will say to people very clearly is that electing someone is not the prize. Electing Barack Obama was not the prize. Does that make sense? That was a part of the process. But the prize is actually getting and improving people's lives.
It's really all I can say. That was really, really good. It was very, very true. You talked about knowing the process and that being such an important part, and it is, right? Like we work hard on that. What are some ways that you think we as students, we as constituents could do a better job of kind of self-informing about the process? Like, it's difficult to learn the process, and it can be a lot, right? And there can be some tricky spots, but what are some resources or some things that you think of or that you wish people would kind of take more advantage of?
Yeah, for example, in any legislative or policymaking body, they have the basics of how their stuff works. right? And then you have, people at your board of elections who can walk you through that. You have the electeds. You have the Jarvises of the world, right? Who can walk you through, how this stuff changes lives. And so there's so many people. There's civics teachers that are in high school that can help with those kinds of things. And then lastly, it's Google, right? And videos and YouTube. But there's so many ways for people just to get an understanding of what if I wake up tomorrow and say, you know what, I'm tired of, the spending happening, but people in my communities haven't gotten a raise in 10 years. Does that make sense? I'm tired of, gun violence. Like they should be able and I think should want to go and use those entities to find out how exactly that they can make change, because for everybody it is somewhat different. But the things that don't change that I'll share is um, first, everything starts with an idea, right? The issue that either somebody brings to you or that a politician or someone else comes up with. And then, what it also does is you have to understand as part of the process is that once that idea gets introduced in whatever form, it could be a bill, it could be um, a resolution, is that the majority of the people that serve on that board have to agree with it. I don't care where you are. And so it's not making it harder than, I don't want people to make this process harder than it has to be. But if there are 5 people on your county commission or 7 people on your city council, then a majority of those people have to agree with that issue. In our case, it's 120. 61 people have to agree. And so the process is making sure that you have an idea and that you're setting up structures so that when you get the idea to the person who can bring it to the forefront, that you've helped them do the work to bring along their colleagues and bring along the people that can influence it. Does that make sense? And one of the other things that I will say is the one way to do that sometimes people discount is by pure education, because people don't know. But the other is stories. Stories, stories, stories. Telling your story to an elected can change the world, because guess what? Maybe I have someone in my family that's gone through that same thing. Maybe I have a constituent who's saying that same thing, and this really resonates with me because now instead of it just being an idea on a piece of paper, it is now a person that's impacting, and my decision or my lack of a decision can hurt or help their life. Does that make sense? And so while there are a lot of formal processes in the United States Congress and the North Carolina General Assembly, it does boil down to bringing the idea forth, getting it in front of the right people, but then putting everyone in the best place to get a majority. But the way that happens, again, that gets discounted, is to have a story to tell and how this legislation does that. For example, one of the things that I was a part of an autism awareness bill that would expand the number of people who could give therapy to kids with autism. I told my story. We included other people that had kids with autism. And what that did is that it put a face on the fact that, wow, just because you don't live in Durham, you live in some small town, you're not being helped the same way I am. Does that make sense? And so being able to incorporate that, again, makes all the difference in the world.
Well, thank you so much for that. I actually have another question here for you. So,
Sure.
do you remember a specific experience where you wish you had done something different? As you've been working through politics, and if you had the opportunity to redo that experience, what would you change or do differently?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Part of this work is a lot of times the ball bounces your way. And sometimes, you don't understand why it bounces that way, but you follow it. And it ends up in places like this. But I think that if I had to think of one instance where I had to do something differently. I don't know. Probably would have made a whole lot more money before I got into politics. That's because it is not for people who are trying to get rich. Um, but I think that one of the things I probably again, would have done is, as I've gone through the process, there were people that you thought and took for granted that they'd always be around. And as those people have passed on, those aren't people that you can call back and talk to about instances. And those you realize that those are nuggets of information that will never be heard again. And I think as I went through a lot of my process, I was very diligent in being involved and being engaged and meeting people and doing those things. But sometimes I will say that I did take some relationships for granted, and I think that and some experiences for granted. And so you want to make sure that you're in the moment, but also cherishing the people that you've come in contact with, because every person has played an incredible role in your life, whether you realize it or not, right? Being engaged with them, spending time with them has led you and changed your perspective. But are probably a good handful or so of people that I really wished I would have taken the time to spend more detailed time with them and to learn from them, because I would have been a much better person for it. I would have probably been able to fill a lot of gaps in my life that I'm having to learn as I go, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. That's super real. And I think we definitely can relate. As we kind of wind down in the last few minutes, we have a question in the chat box that I want to make sure that we get answered, because I think a lot of us, students, alum, we have these moments. The question says, hello, I'm an NCCU grad. Hey, Eagle. I'm interested in learning more about how state government works. How would you suggest starting to get more involved when an internship isn't an option? Are there, excuse me. My apologies, everyone. When an internship isn't an option, are there volunteer opportunities to serve in state offices or other ways to spend time around lawmakers to learn how things work? I know you told some stories, but I'm sure you got something else to give.
Yeah. I think one of the things is that one thing that the virtual environment has done is expanded those general opportunities where you had to go show up in Raleigh, where you had to go show up in a department. Being active in whatever you care about, or if you want to just get involved in general, I think most legislators are really open to someone doing a virtual opportunity first, if it's about internships. Um, I think one of the other pieces that can be done in your community wherever you are is getting involved in an organization that has an interest in what happens in Raleigh. So, for example, it could be an organization that cares about agriculture. Clearly, those people are going to care about the money that's coming from the federal government and how we're going to spend that in North Carolina, right? If you care about solar, then what organization in your area cares about that, and ask them and find out if they have a legislative sort of outreach portion. And what that does for you is it not only engulfs you, immerses you in that issue, but then you also get a chance to have real actionable engagement with a lawmaker and then with a system. Because by doing that, you're obviously going to find an issue or find a bill that you care about, and y'all are going to start to do things like discuss. Oh, okay, well the bill got introduced. Now the bill is in a committee, and what it forces you to do as the process plays on is it forces you to learn, well, who's on that committee? What's the count in that committee? What do you think is going to happen? Does that make sense? And so it allows you, by just getting involved in an organization that has an interest in it, to do that. I think the last part, of course, is you're more than welcome to email me. And I'm glad to have that conversation about all the different ways that it can happen. But I think those are some ways that people don't think about. They just think that you have to go show up, but there's so many organizations that would love to have someone who's interested in it, who wants to learn the process.
Absolutely. I think that was an awesome question, and you gave an awesome answer. This whole conversation has just been wonderful. I think that these Rock the Lyceums are an awesome opportunity for us as students to hear alumni voices, especially, of course, we've had so many awesome speakers, but the alumni are super exciting to me. And I knew that I was like waiting for this moment to be able to participate. Is super, super huge. So thank you, of course, for coming to speak with us today, and our fellow Eagles. And just as we wrap up, can you just let us know why it's so important for you as an Eagle alum to come back and talk to us here in the Nest?
Well, first, thank you for having me. And one of the things I want to say though before I leave is that when people think about advocacy and things like that, it is as simple as when my sister and I were kids, we both wanted candy from my mother, and we had to think about a strategy, right, to get that from her, right? And so when that's the issue that we cared about. When we think about, well, guess what? I don't want that kind. You want this kind. My sister and I had to come together to come to my mother with a proposition. And so it's the key thing about all of this is a natural part of who we are as people. And a process can be just that simple. What do I need to do to say to my mother to give me that candy, right? I'll clean my room for a week if you let me go spend the night at Johnny's house, right? It can be whatever it is, because what you think about is, who do I need to have on my side? Guess what? Got to call daddy. Daddy, can you do this so that mama will let me do that? All those things are part of it. And it's just that simple. And I always use those kinds of basic stories so that people can use it to get off the couch, right? Because in any way possible, you can find a way to advocate, and you can find a way to be a part of the system to change people's lives. And the reason that it's so important to come back to the Nest is because the Nest made me. From the time I got to North Carolina Central, again, I had friends and fraternity brothers that gave me places to stay. I had people who were professors who said, you know what, Zach, you need to go try this opportunity. And because of that, those early interventions and the people that I had a chance to spend quality time with during my time there, and honestly, because of the credibility that North Carolina Central gave me, I tell people that I went to North Carolina Central, and especially if you're in Durham, there's a certain expectation of you and who you are and what truth and service really means. It's a part of, if you walk these halls, if you do these things, it is expected that you're going to go on and do X. And so it gives me that credibility just by saying that I went to North Carolina Central. And the people who have been Eagles and the alumni, especially as I started my political process, not only as elected, but as I was coming through it, I can count every step of the way that somebody has been an Eagle. And so that is, I can't tell you enough how the university, again, its people and its alums have invested in me. And so anytime that I can come back and give what I have, and allow another Eagle to learn from my experience, I'm more than willing to do. So I'm just, again, appreciative for being here. And I want to thank you, amazing ladies, for holding down an amazing conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. And Eagle Excellence truly is an expectation. Thank you again for joining us so much. We ask our viewers to complete the survey that will pop up after tonight's event. And that's all for me, Anaya.
Yes, thank you again for joining us, and I hope that all of our viewers were able to take away what they can do to really make a difference and be a part of government. So we thank you for being here. Again, to all our attendees, thank you for joining us tonight for the Rock the Lyceum, and we ask that you join us for our next Rock the Lyceum event that will feature alum Whitney Fry, who will be discussing leveraging legacy. and that will be on April 21st at 6 p.m. But other than that, thank you again, Mr. Hawkins, and good night, everyone. Please stay safe and remember Equal Pride Amplified.